Yay! Hello, everyone. How's it going? Super excited to be here again. And as you can see, today's edition is slightly different. I also want to make sure that I see all your comments in the YouTube chat because it would be a shame if not. So if you are watching right now, do feel free to use the YouTube chat to talk to us as well, to talk to me, to talk to the speakers. I'm very, very happy to see where people are coming from today, because I know that in the previous editions we had people from all over the place, from Korea, from Brazil. We pretty much had all the world here. Lots of people from Asia, actually, which is always surprising because if I remember correctly, Asia is like ahead of us, so it's like in the middle of the night. And yet people are not afraid to join our meetups. Today we have 3 fantastic speakers for you. I'm really, really excited. I still need to get to the YouTube chat. I keep like blabbering until I'm actually in the pin function for the chat. That's fascinating and interesting, but I don't care. Also, it makes sense to set the chat. It has like a top chat option in YouTube. Set that to live chat if you want to see what is happening. Definitely feel free to say hi in the chat as well. Wonderful. So before we get started, we have a few administrative bits and pieces that I want to get out of the way. First things first, happy holidays. I know that the holidays are still a little way out, or actually have already passed, or are happening right now, or will happen in the more or less near future. But this is our last edition for 2020. And then we'll see each other again in January. If you want to tweet about our wonderful Christmassy Webzurich meetup, then please use the hashtag Webzurich to do so. We're always happy to see that. If you have any like Christmassy motives, like you can show us your Christmas tree, you can show us your decorations, you can show us whatever you're doing at home to make this dark time of the year a little brighter and nicer. Also, how are you watching? Are you having a little nice mug of hot chocolate next to you, or are you, I don't know, drinking something else, or are you having cookies? Actually, I could get some cake. I think I'm going to get some cake later. But yeah, show us how you're joining this, where you're joining this from. Use the hashtag Webzurich for that. For those of you who have not been to previous meetups, and again, it would be really, really cool to see a few new faces showing up in the live chat and saying hi. I know that Mirko already said hi. Hi, Mirko. Always good to have our fellow friends and previous speakers here. Webzurich is and has been a local meetup in Zurich, but now is global thanks to the internet. You could call it, it's like a web meetup on the web, so that's kind of cool. It comes to you in your browser if you wish to do so. We want to bring people together who make the web. Now, who is that? Well, it's web developers, but it's also designers. It is UX experts. It is people who work with extended reality or augmented reality, virtual reality, that kind of stuff. Those who make the web accessible for everyone. If you are doing marketing or SEO, you are always welcome to join us. This is a meetup group for everyone who makes the web and is excited about the web platform. You don't have to be a professional. You can just be someone who likes to play around with web technologies or the web platform, as well as if you are a professional, you're also welcome. Pretty much everyone is welcome here. We have lots of new people joining every month, but we also are really, really excited to have lots of regulars showing up. And I hope that some of our regulars also say hi in the live chat. We have a few principles. First things first, everyone who is playing along to the code of conduct is very much welcome to join us. We want to get together, share information, share our learnings, share our stories, share our projects. What have we been working on? What have we been building together? And maybe you also find a few new people that you didn't know before to build stuff together and have fun and learn from. And that's kind of the idea. That's why we do this also monthly, so that everyone gets a chance to exchange ideas. And if we were to meet in person, we would also just hang out and mingle and have fun together. And that is usually how interesting things get started. A bunch of people started regularly building like little prototypes. They called that Webzurich driven development, and I find that amazing, and it's really, really cool. A few of the talks have been inspired by other talks in the meetup, so that's really, really lovely. To do that and to meet the goal of communicating, we choose English as our main language. If you want to speak another language, especially in the in-person meetups, that's absolutely acceptable. It's just not that helpful to actually get to know as many people as possible and to allow as many people as possible to jump into the conversation. So we recommend speaking English. This meetup would not be there without you all, and I mean you out there as well as all the co-organizers and all of these speakers tonight. Everyone is very much invited to participate. Without talks, we can't really run a meetup, so feel free to talk to us if you want to talk about a project that you have been working on, something that you learned recently, something that you don't have the answer to, and you just want to present the question so that other people can give their ideas. That is the fantastic opportunity. That our talks are 10 to 15 minutes long, and that usually means that it's not that hard to put them together. And we are helping you with putting them together. We are helping you with slides and doing rehearsals if you want to. We definitely want to hear your story and your ideas. So definitely reach out to us if you want to participate. Not that relevant now for the online meetup times, but from the times where we still had a physical location. We are in the Impact Hub, which is pretty much a neutral location, and we are not looking for hosting in other places or companies. We're pretty happy where we are. We are not just these YouTube meetups or the physical meetups. You can also get in touch with your local community elsewhere. So our website basically points you to all the different things that are going on. We have a Slack where you can join and communicate with others, where you can also find a new job or find a new teammate if you're looking for that kind of stuff. We have a Meetup group, which probably brought you here as well. So on Meetup, you can see when the next of these meetups is happening. And some of the stuff can be found on Webzurich, though it's not too active on Twitter, to be honest. Now, I said you can participate. And to drive that point home, it's a 15-minute talk. We don't do Q&A. There's a form on our website. It's a really, really short form where you basically just type in roughly what's your idea and a few bits and pieces about you so that we know how to reach you and contact you and present you on the website. Everyone can do it. There's no bad ideas or submissions. We'll happily talk to you if your submission is interesting to the meetup. If not, we'll also talk to you and let you know what can possibly be changed. So definitely submit a talk and we'll get in touch with you. This Christmas edition is powered by these lovely, lovely people. We have Alexei, we have Daniel, we have Olga, we have Stuart, we have Rob, and this weird-looking person with this weird-looking hat. It's not the same hat as in the picture. I couldn't actually find my regular Santa hat, so I went for this elf hat, which is also really nice. And I'm also very, very grateful for Olga making all these little nice decorations on our pictures. That's fantastic. We're always happy to find some help with the bits and pieces. We are looking for sponsors. If you have any idea on how to support the meetup, please reach out to us. Today's sponsors are Rockstar Recruiting, Graph CMS, and Valtech. And our friends from Rockstar Recruiting, I mean, this year has been rough. A lot of people are looking for new opportunities. Our friends from Rockstar want to bring a little message to you that I shall share now. Oops.
Hello to everyone at Webzurich. Kieran here from Rockstar, hoping that you're all keeping well and safe. Coming to you tonight with 3 new positions that we believe to be quite interesting and also quite varied. So to kick things off, we have a full stack engineering position with a growing startup focused on 3D modeling. You're looking for a skill set of C#, .NET Core, and also React.js on the front end. You'd be working in a cross-functional team responsible for feature enhancement and the development of new features. Secondly, we're looking for a senior front-end consultant with German and English business fluent language skills. You'd be responsible for a variety of projects from conception through to deployment. And really, from a skill set perspective, we need someone who's quite agnostic, very strong vanilla JS skills, and also ideally some full stack perspective with PHP or Java on the back end. Now, finally, this is quite interesting and not something that we would normally offer, but we believe it's worth introducing. So a client of ours are looking for a business development stroke salesperson and actually from a technical background. So the product itself is built using Angular 2 plus, and ideally this person would come from a JavaScript background and have a good understanding of how this one product works with all of its nuances, but then also how it might integrate with existing systems and benefit future customers. So quite different than what we normally offer, but if you believe this to be interesting or any other of the roles that I've mentioned, please feel free to reach out. I'm here for questions after the meetup and looking forward to some of the talks tonight. Cheers, hoping you're well, and speak soon. Cheers.
All right, so that was an interesting message for those of you who are looking for a new opportunity, I hope. Again, if you want to join the conversation, the broader conversation, and not just hang out with us here in this lovely, lovely meetup, definitely check out Webzurich, our website, where you can find the link to join the Slack channel as well as Meetup group. And of course, do please chat with us here. I see that a few people are already talking. Hi, Fabio. Hi, Mirko again. Good to see you all gathering in the YouTube chat. I see that we have more visitors and viewers, so please feel free to jump into the chat and say hi as well. Again, I'm super interested to see where people are from, because this is now a global meetup and it's wild to see where people are joining us. Also, after the meetup, we do have a live chat that you can join. That is at webzh.dev/afterparty. Don't join that now, join that once the talks are over, because we are about to jump into our first talk that I'm really looking forward to. But before that, as I said, the meetup is monthly. The next meetup will be on the 29th of January next year. So we have a little over a month ahead of us, and then we shall meet again and join this lovely, lovely place one more time. Now, I am absolutely excited to introduce you all to a good friend of mine. Hi, Jane. How's it going?
Hi, I'm doing well.
Awesome. Well, I mean, you know, this year has been wild, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
In the pre-meetup chit chat, we were talking that we last saw each other in February, and it feels like it's more than a year ago. We were both not sure if it was this year, but yeah, oh my, oh my. You will talk to us about a really, really interesting topic today, aren't you? Let me add the slides so that all of you can join here as well. You are talking about a culture issue that unfortunately is quite prevalent, right? Prevalent in tech. And I'm super, super excited to have you talking about that, because Jane is not only a good friend, but also a ridiculously smart engineer and also a fantastic human being. And I'm so, so excited to have you today and see what you want to share with us and the community today. You ready?
Yes, thank you for this lovely introduction.
Oh my, there's no introduction that actually even does you any honor, because holy moly, you are fantastic, and I'm really, really happy to have you here tonight. So with that, I shall hand the stage to you and retreat into my chamber. Have fun, everyone.
Wow. No, I have big shoes to fill after that introduction. This is my first online talk, so it feels a little bit weird to be talking to my own screen, but just bear with me. I'm just going to do it like this. I hope everybody can see my slides still. So as Martin said, I am Jane Must, and on Twitter you can find me at Jane_Mast, and I am a software engineer at a Norwegian startup called Confrere. If you want to see my slides later, you can find them on Noticed/Jane. So let's start. Over the past 10 years or so, I worked at a number of different companies, from small startups to big multinationals. I joined every one of them with a good feeling about the company and the people that work there. I left all of them, at least partially, because of the culture. Tech is still very much a white boys club. It's a group of people who are self-assured and smug, trying to accomplish more than possible no matter who they hurt in the process, not caring about privacy or even people's life, just to try that glimpse of success that's always just a little bit further away from the horizon. That's the bro culture. And today I'm going to show you how the bro culture happened in tech and what we can all do about it to break this boys club. So how you can unbro your culture. A recent study by Harvard Business Review showed that many leaders assume that they are better at valuing diversity than that they actually are. They think that they value diversity, but most of them solely use it to get recognition themselves. They show the outside world how diverse they are. The great enemy of inclusivity we find is the illusion of it. Companies have tried to improve their inclusivity and diversity and find ways to show that it has improved. They document every effort they made and add something about diversity in their company values. But this is all just an illusion. It's some sort of paper trail of fake improvements. It's not hard to count the percentage of women or people of color in your organization. But it's just showing data about hiring and promoting diverse candidates doesn't make your company the most welcoming. It's about building a climate of trust, appreciation, and openness to differences in thoughts, styles, and backgrounds. And you might think that you have little influence in the inclusivity of the company, but you are part of that company. And you can be a coworker who's welcoming and make sure that everyone feels included. Well, let's go back a little bit. How did we actually get here? How did the tech industry become this place where white men hold all the cards and make all the rules? Because it didn't start out that way. In the beginning of computer science, men focused on building the hardware while women pioneered software development. Arguably, the most famous software pioneer was Grace Hopper, who in 1944 programmed the Mark I, which was a supercomputer that helped design the atomic bombs. But not only that, she also invented the concept of a compiler. She helped develop COBOL and created a language called Flowmatic. Plus, she sets the groundwork for networks. She had an amazing ability to take problems and turn them into mathematical equations and turn that into machine language. In the 1960s, the computer industry was growing and getting more lucrative. It was so lucrative that in 1967, the Cosmopolitan decided to tell their readers about the healthy salary women would get in this line of work. Alongside it, it had photos of Ann Richardson, an IBM systems engineer. The article starts out with telling the reader, a girl senior system analyst gets $20,000 and up. Now in today's money, that's roughly $150,000 a year. If you compare that to a female secretary in New York back then, which was a high-paying job in a high-paying city, the average was around $50 to $100 a year. So you could almost make 4 times as much as a programmer. And it also had a quote from Grace Hopper. In it, she said, "It's just like planning a dinner." Something she said women are expert at because of their patience and attention to detail. She said women are naturals at computer programming. The wages were so high because there were not enough programmers to fill open jobs, sort of like how it is now. But at the same time, the industry also started to shut women out. Companies were desperate to find new programmers, so recruiters began working to find skills and personality of a good programmer. In the meantime, salaries went up and programming was getting a better status. At first it was seen as a typist job, but it was now becoming a professional job, which back then was something masculine. To find the right candidates, companies were using the IBM aptitude test. But because it was easy to cheat on this test, they also started with personality tests, like I mentioned before. 2 male psychologists, William Cannon and Dallas Perry, profiled 1,378 programmers to make a vocational interest skill. They believed that this skill could predict success in the field. But of those 1,378, only 186 were women. This is weird because, as I said, the male-female ratio was different. It was almost 50-50. So based on their studies, they found out that good programmers are people that like solving puzzles, but they also shared one very specific trait. They wrote that programmers dislike activities involving close personal interaction. In their paper, the words woman and women didn't appear once. They only referred to the group as men. Their personality tests became widespread, and people were starting to be selected for being antisocial and not just for talent. And this was the beginning of the now well-known stereotype of the seclusive developer. But what is clear about this is that this criteria favored male programmers more than female programmers. Antisocial personality disorder, for instance, favors men by 3-to-1 ratio. Autism and Asperger's is seen as high as 70 times more in men. 7, not 70. Besides that, women who have these characteristics are seen as not liking people, while men are seen as a lone wolf, something to be admired. In his 2010 book, The Computer Boys Take Over, Nathan Esminger wrote, "The industry selected for antisocial mathematically inclined males, and therefore antisocial and mathematically inclined males were overrepresented in the programmer population. This in turn reinforced the popular perception that programmers ought to be antisocial and mathematically inclined, and therefore male." And once this process got underway, every room related to computer science began to be filled with antisocial men. Classes, conferences, labs, workplaces, they became senior programmers, bosses, and teachers. In the 1980s, when computers became normal to own at home, it became a boy thing, something to be used by a father to bond with his son. And the stereotypical nerd was so widespread that mid-80s movies like Weird Science, Revenge of the Nerds, War Games, they romanticized the awkward geniuses who uses tech to win affection of attractive women. But even though popular media didn't create this stereotype, they definitely reinforced it. In the mid-90s, there was a startup called Trilogy. A lot of people don't know Trilogy, but I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story because it's basically the beginning of the bro culture as we know it now. Trilogy was run by a Stanford dropout called Joe Lehman. After getting money from his investors for his software, he had an idea on how to hire new programmers. And it's one that's still visible in today's hiring strategies. Instead of hiring experienced programmers, he would take talented, overachieving students directly out of graduation. The ethos of the company was, we're elite talent, and it's potential and talent, not experience, that has merit. They were only looking for the best. To get those students, they passed out laptops in universities and hosted extravagant dinners at top restaurants in San Francisco. And most importantly, the recruiters were mainly young, good-looking women. The idea of Joe Lehman was to hire women that would never look twice at an engineer. But once a student was interested in working for Trilogy, they had to undergo a series of brain teasers. And this too might sound very familiar to you. They would ask them questions like how many piano tuners are in the world. This is a hiring strategy that Google has done till about 2013, but a lot of companies are still doing this. And these questions don't have anything to do with being a good programmer. This is for cultural fit. Trilogy was looking for people with extreme confidence, people that would answer these questions without any actual expertise. Their company culture was work hard, play hard. They had insane working hours, they did drinking and gambling and company trips to Vegas. Plus they valued potential over experience. All of this made the culture male-dominated. It was completely hostile towards women. Trilogy was among the first in a long line of tech startups that required assimilating into a culture of masculine arrogance that many people, especially women, might want to sign up for. In the past 20 years, much has changed, but the bro culture still exists. You might have heard stories about Uber, Yahoo, or Boeing, many, many others. Now, this story had focused a lot about women, but it's not just women. It also happens to all other marginalized groups, people of color, gender, sexual, and romantic minorities, people with a disability, and people in economic and social hardship are amongst others that undergo sexism, harassment, and discrimination. But how can you help with that? How can you be a better coworker? A good way to start with that is to make people feel welcome and included. Onboarding new people is mostly a simple to-do list at a company. It's a bit of paperwork, an introduction on Slack. Maybe you have a meeting with some manager that tells you about the mission and vision of the company. But what's being left out here is to make you feel like you're being part of the company. That you as an individual feel welcomed. And people also forget that this is not something that we only need to do with new hires. Making people feel welcome and included is something that's always ongoing. But it does start out with reaching out to new colleagues. When a new hire joins your team or your company, actively include them in as much as possible. Not everyone is comfortable with getting to know people, and it's hard for them to reach out themselves. So maybe think about your first day, week, month, and what you wish people did or told to you, and do that to the new hires. One of the things you can try is by introducing onboarding buddies. Someone that just helps out the first few weeks with getting to know new people, getting to know the company culture and how everything works. And someone who checks in on the new hire on a regular basis, asks how it goes, ask a little bit about the personal life, just make them feel welcome. But when someone does join your team, remember that the entire team changes. You have a completely new dynamic. Just think of it as forming a new team and how you would handle that. Try to make sure that this person feels like an equal member in this new team. And don't assume that they will eventually learn, because that's just going to exclude them. So when you have meetings that are going to discuss things about things that happened in the past, talk to them before and explain what's what. So language is a tool that we use to create a common understanding. It's powerful and it's essential for creating an environment where everyone feels welcome and included. But sadly, it's also used to leave people out, to discriminate and marginalize. And this has been done for so long, it's becoming an unconscious habit. It's such a habit that people actually disagree that some terms are excluding people. To create a more inclusive environment, we need to take a look at these words and phrases that have long gone unchallenged, and dig deep into empathy and imagine an experience that's not our own. There's a few things that I would like to point out. So some changes that you can make on how you communicate. So jargon and abbreviations, they can exclude people who might not have specialized knowledge of a particular subject and impede effective communication as a result. Try not to use jargons that are made up in your company, and only use jargons that are widely used, and if necessary, explain what you mean. But if you do have made up abbreviations in your company, you can, for example, in a presentation where you use it, add the full phrase on the slide the first time it comes up. So this is something that's been discussed a lot. People say that using guys instead of people or folk or everyone is normal. And yes, it's normal in the sense that a lot of people are using it like that. But using guys assumes that the normal default human being is male. And numerous of studies show that guys, he, and men cause people to specifically think of males. When you talk about your user in a meeting and you say he clicks on that button, you're picturing a man clicking on that button, which could then lead to unconscious assumptions. So instead of guys, you can use people, folk, everyone, or y'all. And instead of he or she, you can use they. I sometimes hear people using phrases like they're just a little bit OCD. But terms like bipolar, OCD, and ADD, they are real psychiatric disabilities that some people, maybe some of your coworkers, actually possess. They should not be used as metaphors for everyday behavior. Also, try to avoid derogatory terms that stem from the context of mental health. For example, crazy, mad, schizo, or psycho. And it also counts when you're coding. Don't use derogatory terms in your comments or your commit messages or your PRs. Don't use profanity, keep it inclusive. And don't assume that just men are going to read your code. Another way to be an awesome coworker is by being humble and recognizing your own limitations and shortcomings. Being humble doesn't mean to think less of yourself. It actually simply means to think of yourself less. And by doing so, you can help with making others feel more included. For example, knowing that you don't have the answers might lead you to ask others for their input. And this signals to your colleagues that you're open to other ideas, to their ideas. And as I just mentioned, the first step of being humble is accepting your own limitations. So I'm now going to tell you the hard truth. You are not the best at everything, and probably you're not the best at anything. And nearly everyone, except maybe babies, know things that you don't. And by accepting this, you can learn from everyone. You will become more empathetic and people will understand you better as well. If you're not afraid of making mistakes and be honest about them, it also shows that the company doesn't have a culture where everyone has to be perfect. It relieves stress in both you and your colleagues, and it opens up conversations. Recognizing your limitation does not mean abandoning your dreams. Humble people are perpetual learners, and they are not terrified of knowing less than someone else. But to learn, we need to listen to each other. When someone listens to you, whether it's an idea you're sharing or a project challenge you're working through, it feels supportive to have someone all in, witnessing what you're going through. So try to talk less and listen more. Don't interrupt someone even if they make mistakes and you want to make a correction. Try to understand someone's viewpoint and be interested in what they have to say. Don't be distracted of the next thing you're planning to say. And when you want to ask questions, make sure that the person you're speaking to is done. But it also goes the other way around. At meetings, a lot of people have the feeling that they are not able to make a contribution. Some people seem to dominate meetings while others stay quiet or are ignored. Try to think of ways how you can make your meetings more effective for all participants. You can do this, for example, by sharing an agenda beforehand, but also by cutting people off that have been dominating the conversation, or maybe by asking people who have been quiet for their feedback. So it's a terrible cliche, but a little bit of kindness goes a long way. It's a cliche, but it's also the core of this whole talk. If you want to have a more welcoming environment, people have to be kind to each other, and that will generate a ripple effect. If you start being more inclusive and kind to your coworkers, they will start doing the same to you and others as well. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed your talk, and buy this book because I got a lot of information from it, and it's very good. It's mostly about venture capitalists, but it's very eye-opening. Thank you.
There's the unmute button. Sorry. Thank you so much, Jane. This was amazing and so packed with information, and it's keeps blowing my mind. And I know how tricky it is to navigate all these things, and I know how hard it is to feel like alienated. And I hope that more of us in tech are using whatever privilege they have. And I know that I have a lot of privilege because I am not worrying about money. I have shelter over my head. I have enough food. I am relatively safe. I'm a white heterosexual male. So like we should all definitely be more inclusive, be nicer and kinder to each other. Not just I don't know, change the way that you address people, but that's one small step that every one of us can take. And I'm so saddened that even that seems to be like a severe hurdle for a lot of people. And thank you a lot for the talk. And I do definitely hope that we get to eventually soon see each other again so that I can basically just give you a huge heart for the amazing talk that you just did, and just for being a fantastic human being. That would also warrant a hug, I think. I feel like we should definitely meet each other again in the real world once we can. But until then, be sure to remember you always have a place to come and talk here. And I am very, very grateful for all your support and for being a fantastic human being. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. And thank you for inviting me here. It was great to talk. And,
it is a huge honor. Also, it's a huge honor to actually be trusted enough to be your first online talk. So I hope that I know it feels weird, right? When I did my first online talk, it felt like you're talking to yourself kind of because you're in your room talking to your camera. But trust me, you have been heard. We are seeing very positive comments out there.
Good. It kind of feels like the same when I'm rehearsing my talk, but then I know that behind my screen, there's people, which is But yeah.
It is a strange feeling, but thank you so much for your trust and the fantastic talk. And I hope that you have a fantastic, wonderful holiday season and get to take some time off after this turbulent year. And
thank you.
All right. So in
I'll
that
see you at
case,
the after party chat.
see you at the after party. Right, after party. There is one thing that I kept forgetting. I forgot. We have 2 free conference tickets to give away. We will give them away in the after party chat. So you want to be in the after party chat after this meetup to get a chance to be in the raffle for the 2 talks. Now, without much further ado, I'd like to invite our next speaker to the stage. Hi, Adim.
Hi, Martin. Good evening.
How's it going?
Good, thank you. Doing our best. Finishing 2020 on a good note.
Right, that's the best we can do at this point. And I mean, wow. To be honest, everything that any of us achieved this year is a huge achievement because I think the cards have definitely been stacked against us, no?
Yes, definitely. And it doesn't look like it's getting better, but let's just keep fingers crossed. And 2021, is near.
I have the bad feeling that we are having to deal with this for at least like a little while. I don't think this is going to go back to normal very, very soon, but I hope that we are definitely getting back on track in 2021 at some point. So keeping fingers crossed.
Yeah, hopefully. Let's see.
Talking about keeping fingers crossed, you were talking about something that I don't know very much about, but I'm really, really excited to learn more about it. And I think it's basically, it exists to not have you keep your fingers crossed because we are talking about blockchains, aren't we?
Yes, we will. Part of it. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite exciting. And I have seen a few React Native talks, and every single time I've seen one, it has been interesting and exciting. So I'm really, really looking forward to see how to port a blockchain library to React Native on mobile. Would you like to take it away?
Sure, thank you very much, Martin.
Awesome. So big round of applause from our audience, from our virtual audience. So I'll do my best to like, woo, cheer you, and I'll be back. Have fun.
Awesome, thanks. So thank you very much, Martin, and thanks for having me today. So I'm originally from Switzerland, not too far from Zurich, but never had the chance to be there in person before the Corona situation. So today I'll be talking about React Native and how to bring a blockchain library to React Native. So these are 2 different worlds in a way. React Native for mobile platforms, and on the other side we have blockchain libraries with native codes, and we just want to combine these 2 worlds and get the best out of them. So let's talk about React Native. I guess most of you are already familiar with React.js, the web framework. So React Native is also a JavaScript framework, but made based on React, but for the mobile platforms. So the idea is to use JavaScript and to implement mobile apps for iOS and Android. And the great thing about React Native is the ability to be able to share this code, the JavaScript code, between iOS and Android. So I'm personally coming from the native side. So I was building mobile apps with Objective-C for iOS and Java for Android. So you have to do them separately, like completely separately, different code base, where here with React Native, you can reuse. Sometimes you can have your full app made in JS, whereas sometimes you also need some native codes as well. It's great because it also allows easy integration of native code and library, what we will see in the next slides. It has a huge community, so it was made by Facebook, and now the community of maintainers is growing every day. Tons of NPM packages available, so this is really, really helpful when working on the projects, on React Native projects. And it really have this native feeling. So there are other hybrid, what we call hybrid alternatives that exist but I'm really fan of React Native because it provides this native feeling, and also for the ability of easily bringing all this native code to your mobile applications, while still building most of your app in JavaScript and already making it ready for iOS and Android. So a quick slide about blockchain and what is the link between blockchain and React Native here is that blockchain is the distributed ledger technology that you might already probably have heard about. It's a technology that is secure, transparent, and trustless, where a ledger is shared between all the machines in the network, and there is no way to modify, edit. So this ledger is immutable, it's shared, so everybody has the same version. It allows everybody to keep track of what's been happening there. And a very good example of where the blockchain technology is used at its best is cryptocurrencies. So you probably all heard about Bitcoin, and Bitcoin at its core is using the blockchain technology. So every transactions are written in a ledger that is shared among all the computers in the network. This is an immutable ledger. You cannot modify it, you cannot edit it, you cannot go back. It's really a secure way to make transactions. And because it needs to be secure, it needs to be efficient, most of the blockchain libraries are written using low-level programming languages, so C, C++, and now also written a lot with Go as a language. So here, when ones want to bring a blockchain library to your React Native app, if you're building a mobile app for the blockchain or for cryptocurrency project, and you want to use this native library, you need a way to be able to easily port this blockchain library to your mobile platform. And it's really interesting because there are more and more blockchain and crypto projects using React Native in their mobile app. So here are a few examples. Relay is a company I co-founded and we launched a few months ago to easily buy and sell Bitcoin, Swiss-made and available in Europe. The Quantum Resistant Ledger and the Elastos are blockchain projects. Quantum Resistant Ledger is bringing the quantum security to the blockchain technology, and the Elastos is a blockchain project building the new smart web, where in this smart web, users will really finally be able to own their data, to share their data, and even be able to monetize their data and also any digital asset. And this blockchain also has a unique way of communicating within the network using their own P2P network, which makes it more secure. And in the next slides, I will take the example of the Elastos library. So the Elastos project has a wallet library, which allows you to create a wallet for your cryptocurrency, and then you can send and receive your cryptocurrency in this wallet. React Native provides native modules. These are components that allows communication between JavaScript and native platform API. So initially, these were made so that you can use native APIs from iOS or Android. For example, here, the example that you can see here is from the React Native website on the native modules page, and they show an example of how to use the calendar in your iOS app. So from your React Native, you will be able to access the calendar API, create an event, save an event, access, and do everything that you could do with Objective-C or Swift. But here, you will be able to access these functions from JavaScript. And this can be also for any other API from the Android platform. But native modules are here so that you can communicate between JavaScript and Objective-C, or with JavaScript and Java. So it doesn't go beyond. But today we want to take this one step further, meaning that we are going to talk about a native library written in C++, and we will take the example of a function from this library, and we will call this function from our JavaScript code directly in React Native in a two-ways communication back and forth. So we'll take this example of the wallet from the Elastos library that has functions like signing, verifying, and generating mnemonic. I will tell you what a mnemonic is a bit later. And so why would you like to do this? You can think that you already have everything, every library possible in NPM, or that the project will at some point write the JavaScript, develop the JavaScript implementation of this library, but it's not always the case. So these native libraries are more efficient. As mentioned earlier, they're written with low-level programming languages. They are maintained by the core team. So it means that you're always up to date. You have always the best version of this library. And it's there, so why not just use it? You don't have to rewrite everything in JavaScript just so that you can use it in your project. You can just use it already as is. And if we look a bit closer on how this looks like, we have our JavaScript code in our React Native circle there, and we have an external native SDK here, or our library, the wallet library written in C or C++. And in between, we have this code that is a bridge between these two parts that we want to bring together. And here, this part is either Objective-C or Java, depending if you're working for iOS or Android. So what is the function that we will port today is called generate mnemonic. A mnemonic is a list of 12 to 24 words, and it has been developed so that you can easily, ideally, it's still not super easy to remember all these words, but the idea was that you could easily remember the access to your crypto wallet. With these words, you are able to generate a list of private and public key pairs, which are actually opening the doors to your wallet. So think of this as the main password for your crypto wallet. And if you lose your mnemonic, you lose access to your wallet. So this is super, super important. So in this wallet library from the Elastos project, we have this function that is called generate mnemonic. It takes two parameters, language and words. So if the language is English, you don't need the words. Let's take the example of English. By calling this function, you will get back a list of 12 words. So this will generate these 12 words, and with these 12 words, you will have access to your crypto wallet. So meaning you will have all the key pairs, public, private keys that you can send and receive cryptocurrency to your wallet. And now we have this library written in C++ with this generate mnemonic function, and we want to access it from our React Native mobile app. So I will show you the example for iOS and also the example for Android. So let's start with iOS, because iOS is actually the easiest in this specific case. On iOS, the main programming language has been Objective-C for quite some time, and now slowly switching to Swift. But if we will be talking about Objective-C because it's much simpler, and as I mentioned, our core library was written in C++. And on iOS, you can have a mixed language that is called Objective-C++. So meaning that you have your Objective-C code, and you can include C++ calls directly in your Objective-C code. The only thing that is required is to change the extension of the file. Instead of .m, you change it to .mm. And you can also change the identity directly. This is a screenshot from Xcode, where you can directly change the identity of your file to Objective-C++. And of course, you also have always the header file that goes together. Once you have this, you only need to start your Objective-C++ file with a specific @implementation call with a name. So here we have rn Elastos main chain for React Native Elastos main chain. And we have the export module here that is at the top of our Objective-C++ file, and then we can start writing our functions. So concretely, this is like a schematic representation about how this works. So we have our mobile app, And whenever the user is tapping the generate mnemonic button, this is going to call a list of actions and returns back the 12 words that we were asking for. So on top, we have our JavaScript code where we import the native module. So this is where the native module part is happening. It's on the first part, on the top part. As in the previous slide, I showed you how we called our native module. And here we are calling the native module with the generate mnemonic function. This code is calling our Objective-C++ file, where we have actually also created a new function called generate mnemonic that returns a callback to JavaScript. And this Objective-C++ file, the function here is actually directly calling the C++ function, which is the original function, the main function that was written in the library itself. So you can see here it returns a string. The function itself is also called generate mnemonic, and it takes these two parameters, language, and a list of words if the language is not English. And in the end, we have the whole path here from JavaScript to Objective-C++ via native modules, and then to C++ directly in thanks to the Objective-C++ implementation in Xcode that then goes back to JavaScript. And this is a two-way communication. A bit more tricky on Android, and tricky because you have this additional piece of the puzzle that is called the GNI, which is the Java native interface. So here, native modules in React Native are taking part of the JavaScript-Java communication, but not the rest. And then between Java and C++, because our library is in C++, we have the GNI, which requires an additional implementation. So again, if we look at how this work together, we all start again with JavaScript, where we import our blockchain library that calls Java thanks to native modules. So in Java, we have our generate mnemonic function. And then between the C++, so the function in the call in the library, the generate mnemonic call in the library, and Java, we have the native interface that is doing the bridge there. So this is an additional call that we have to implement, because that's the only way to communicate between Java and C++, which makes it a bit more difficult than iOS, where we can directly use C++ code in our Objective-C files. But this is how the whole implementation would work on Android. And in the end, once you made these two parts, develop these two parts in your React Native app, you will be able just to import as long as you use the same name for your native modules. You can just have one single call to import my native module blockchain library and then generate mnemonic. You don't even have to distinguish between iOS or Android. No condition required there. Just by calling this generate mnemonic function from this native module, you will be able to have access to the native library. So I hope this was clear, and just to give you an overview of how one uses native code and native libraries in React Native, which I am really fan of, and which really still keeps me working with React Native. And thank you very much for your time. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the talk. I did not expect to see some JNI in my life, especially not, like, as in, again, in my life, and especially not in the Webzurich meetup. That was interesting. That is, how did you, like, is this all well documented, or did you have to like push through a lot of pain? Because I know that when I was working with hybrid mobile applications in 2014, that was pure pain.
Yeah, 14 was definitely really bad. In a way that it was just slowly starting, and but now React Native is really robust and stable. Native modules work really fine, but then when you have to go a bit further, Again, in iOS is much easier thanks to Objective-C++, but you can just Google GNI and look at the results you'll find there. It's not much, and then it's really scary. That's when it gets really complicated. I have to admit, I'm a bit. So I try to limit the calls there, like use it just really for important functions, and trying to do the rest. So everything that is UI UX related is always on React Native. Just very, very specific functions on the native side. But the GNI is really really painful to work with. But hopefully this could get solved in the near future. The React Native team is working on a new implementation that they call Turbo modules. And hopefully this will bring a bit more easier implementation. So I haven't been there yet. So I'm still using the old way, the legacy way. But Turbo modules look really interesting, and that might also help a lot bringing native libraries to React Native. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I see. There's like still a lot of innovation happening, and it's still not a solved problem, so to say.
No.
No, that's exciting. That's exciting. I mean, you are basically on the forefront of innovation there, so that's really, really cool. Thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you very much, Martin.
This has been fabulous, and I hope to see you also in the after party chat as well. And thanks a lot. This has been great. And again, I did not expect to have my brain when you said like, oh, we're gonna look at some C++. I'm like, ooh, again, really? I had to do that earlier this week. I don't want to. But it was really nice and enjoyable. Thank you so much. This was really, really cool.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. See you later.
See you.
And now, before we go to the last talk of today, I remind you, we have 2 free conference tickets to give away. I have prepared 2 questions that I will ask in the after-party chat. So if you want to get a chance to grab one of these tickets, please join the after-party chat. And this is going to be interesting. And now we have our last but not least speaker of today. Hi, Vitaly. How are you doing?
Good to see you. Look at you. You are very passive today.
And do you hear the jingling? It's amazing.
Well, I'm not going to pretend that I love this, so this is okay. It is great.
I got this from a friend of mine last year for a physical event that we did last year, back in the days before everything went.
I remember.
You do remember? Wasn't it like a year ago today that you did a workshop with us in Zurich?
I think it was very close for sure. So I think that this was also the meetup, and I was really so excited about this. And it was a long one. It was the end of a very, very long year, and so we ended up. It was like with a very nice kind of get together. Final.
I miss you. I miss you.
Oh, same here.
I hope that we get to see each other and hug each other soon.
Oh, you know what? I actually made a kind of a deal with this year. So yes, so this year I just said goodbye to this year, and we agreed, both of us, that the next year is going to be the best year ever for everybody, including the wonderful people who are listening right now, and of course you, and probably your hat as well.
My hat will have a fantastic day, and then
I have no thoughts about that.
My hat is basically done for the year, and then also looking forward to a better 2021, where he hopefully, or she, I don't know, I don't want to assume anything, where it will finally get to meet more people. Waiting for that for a long time. Yes. And I know that you have been coming to us from another event, so I hope that all went well, and that you are. Look at that! That is amazing.
It's just,
would you mind sharing?
It's very interesting because, like, in general, if you speak about like online events and all, it's nice to have them, but it's still very different from what you get in an in-person conference, of course. But on the other side, you can actually be in like 4 or 5 different places at the same day, which is not something you could pull off, in the good old days. But I think that the future, we can talk about it a bit later maybe, will be very, very interesting for online events and offline events and all. So we'll see.
Oh yeah, we learned a lot about online events this year. The good, the bad, the ugly, basically. I think I should probably at some point talk about that or write a blog post about that maybe.
That would be useful.
Yeah, maybe I should do that. I should share my insights there. And yours, because I'm pretty sure you have been doing like a bazillion online events, don't know?
Not bazillion, but we did a few, and we did learn some things along the way. I actually published an article about this just, I think, a month ago or 2 months ago, basically focused on online workshops. That was really exciting because you end up reaching people that you would never reach otherwise as well.
Yeah.
So that
For
was
workshops
really,
is awesome.
yeah. So
I'm going to read that one. But before I get to read that one, would you like to take us into a completely new world of wonder like you always do and share your slides with us?
yes, I will do my best. So let me see.
Excellent.
I believe there is a
Then
share screen button, and when I
there
look at
is
the
a
share screen button, it seems like I can share the screen. So I'm going to do that, and then we have the Inception thing
That's
going on.
amazing. Look at that. Boom.
Oh, that's incredible.
Isn't
But
that
now,
awesome?
if I go and actually make it full screen here, do you please let me know if you can actually see the cat?
We can see the cat, I think.
just
YouTube,
one.
can you see the cat? YouTube, give us a shout.
Well, there's usually
YouTube
like
is
20
fine.
seconds delay
That's
between like when
it's
you
awkward delay. I should really not do these like live interactions with YouTube where there is like a safety delay. But in the chat, Alexei said that it is indeed a year ago that you were in Zurich and we were
Yes.
actually seeing each other in person for the Christmas edition.
This was actually right a year ago, and it was a very important year for me in many ways. And so I was really looking forward to the next one, very much like today.
Oh,
Seems
yeah. And
repeating the good old days.
Same old, right?
Yeah, but the talk is different. So this talk today is going to be a bit different.
Yes, I'm really looking. Last year was privacy, and now we're getting web forms right, and that's cool. I'm looking forward to that. And as YouTube told me that they can see the cat, I shall shut my mouth, close, and give the stage to you. Have fun. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much, Martin. Hello, everyone. Such a pleasure to be there, although albeit digitally. Yes, it was a year ago when we actually met. Maybe I hope at least that I met some of you. And this was an interesting year for all of us, I think, in many ways. For one reason, for me as well, just because actually, if I'm being very honest, I also had a bit of time to think and to make some decisions and to look into the things that are happening on the web, and also specifically kind of try to develop myself, I guess, when you had the time. So one of the things that was really interesting for me was actually to figure out how to deal with forms. And it was a really strange situation because most of the time when we think about forms, we might think about things like checkout and things like that, which are kind of done. So you look at Shopify and you look at Magento, you look at this traditional checkout, and you might be right to assume that within the last 20-25 years of existence of the web and of e-commerce, we should be in the position where we have got it. We know what we're doing. And I was very, very fascinated to see that this is not the case at all. So what I want to do with you today is to kind of look into what is the deal with forms, how we can make forms a bit better, and what could be done strategically to avoid issues down the line. And again, when I talk about web forms, of course, we're going to need to look into a very general, broad definition of web forms, because they're not just checkout or anything, and they're not coming out of nowhere. Obviously, forms have a past, and this is where essentially they're coming from. Many of the interfaces that we are going to be designing today will be mimicking in one way or the other something that we're used to from paper forms. And if you look at the paper forms, like the State of California voter registration form, you'll find out like all the fine little things like, a US citizen, yes or no. Maybe it's checkboxes. Maybe it's radio buttons, it's hard to say. That's going to be a select drop down for sure, right? And then you have the different width fields with different widths, sometimes long ones, sometimes short ones, sometimes last name, middle name, first name. Many ways, exactly the same thing that we're actually mimicking in web interfaces as well. And then you also have address. And then if you know street address, describe where you live, right? So it's like address line 2, if you like. And then, of course, again, the state, the zip code, and other things. As you keep going, eventually you're discovering this big one, which is the biggest button I've ever seen, plus a couple of multi-select options, I guess, over here as well. And the truth is, of course, that forms are actually everywhere. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter where you're looking and what you're designing, what you're building. You will have to deal with some sort of forms. Because why? Well, because forms is a very common interface element which requires some interaction. So if you have a design up or checkout form, if you have search or filtering form, newsletters, configurators, online transactions, any kind of services, application forms, authentication, really doesn't really matter. You will have to deal with forms. Now, unfortunately, most of the times, these forms don't look very cool, right? So this is, a bit boring. Maybe you have your billing address, and you have, those things, and sometimes they're a bit shorter. But what really surprised me, and I just questioned myself and my life choices at some point, because I'm really passionate about forms. I don't know about you, but I love a good button or a good radio button, or even at times a nice little autocomplete, even if it's a drop down. I do, but I still don't get some of the decisions that we've been making for the last years or decades. Specifically, it is very common still to ask for an email address and then to ask to verify your email address. Now, what we usually do is, of course, copy pasting unless we're being blocked from that. Now, we always do the same for the password as well. Right? It's not uncommon to ask for a password and then to verify the password yet again, right? But why don't we ever do that for first name and last name? Why is nobody ever asked me to verify my first name or verify my last name? They're probably a bit more important than the password or the email that we're setting, right? Well, and then, of course, there is a question of, optional or required. How do we mark optional? How do we mark required? Seems obvious, but these are some of the decisions we need to make, right? And we'll get to that in the course of this talk as well. Now, sometimes forms are just weird. Like, this is one of the stranger ones. If you ever wanted to apply for a visa to go to the UK back in the day, you would got kind of to the page where you were asked to fill in your data. And that page was titled Other Passport. It's very convenient, very friendly, I guess. And then the note here was saying, enter all characters exactly as they appear on your ID, including letters, numbers, and bracket symbols, which you are supposed to type in. And in fact, if you have a passport that actually has those brackets in, you actually have to type them in here, otherwise the form wouldn't validate, right? It's just a little bit weird and a little bit strange, right? And then it gets madder and it gets crazier, because this is probably the weirdest thing I've seen in my life. So please write down the timestamp of the time right now, because you will never see something like that ever again. So if you are interested in signing up for a newsletter on an e-commerce site, what you're supposed to do on that particular site is to add the newsletter sign up to the shopping cart. You can also change the quantity of it, right? Now, luckily it's free and you can also remove it. So then you're supposed to check out with that thing. You check out, and as you check out, you're typing in your first name, your last name, your middle name, your email address, your password, and all of that. And then by email, you're receiving a notification about the newsletter sign up link, which you need to click in order to go to the newsletter sign up page, where you can actually type in your email yet again manually. And then, and that's the best part, you actually get an email to verify your email, right? Why do we do this? Right? And it sounds like, okay, some of the weird experiences and weird interfaces from the dark sides of the web or so. But in reality, it's kind of all over. That example I show all the time. This is an insurance company from Germany, and in here, in the form, they are asking a very simple question: do you have children? And the proper interface solution for answering this kind of question, because in the end, the forms are all about asking questions and getting the right answers, right? It's all about, just dragging a value on a slider with the value count plus pencil icon that you can click on, right? And you might ask yourself why, but what I ask myself is, how is it going to work specifically? Because if you have a slider, sliders have this kind of natural thing, which they have a minimum value and a maximum value. Now, luckily, the minimum value is 0, which is something that we probably know. But then whenever you go to the maximum here, what are you going to set? What is it going to be? Now, luckily, it's 10, right? But if you happen to have 11, you can have a way out, because you can click on the pencil icon, and then this thing turns into an input field, which you can type in 11 into, but then the interface will tell you, no, 10. It's at most 10, right? And so this thing is just all over. Now, of course, not all interfaces are like that. Some of them are just a bit confusing. I guess you could tell what kind of interface that is, right? So if we look into it in action, this is what it's going to be like, right? This is a page where you are supposed to filter some of the products available in the catalog by size. And specifically, this is the one that's coming in on a sales page, right? And I'm wondering, yes, I do like buttons. I have nothing against buttons. Is there a better way of designing this? And I started really thinking about, is there really a better way of designing this? And what would it be? Right? Not to make fun of all those examples, but just how can I figure out if a solution that I'm coming up with for a form is better or not? Is something like this, for example, which would go from 0 to 100 or so, better? How can I say if it's better or not, right? And this will kind of becomes quickly like the first part that I want kind of to dive into, really get a very objective measures. Because if you ask you, right? This is the good design, is the bad design. That's very subjective. It's like you can't really do anything with it. I need to get some metrics to figure out if something is bad or not. Now, I know that this is bad, for example. Why? Well, because it takes a remarkable amount of time and it's extremely annoying and painful to type in. And I'm not even talking about the audio version of the captcha, right, which is just frustrating. And frustration is never good to anybody. It's definitely not good for business, and it's definitely not going to be good for any customer, right? Now, luckily, we got rid of the captcha with reCAPTCHA, with invisible captcha or reCAPTCHA free, right? So we ended up with another version of the captcha, which of course is the world of crosswalks and traffic lights, where I'm always wondering, this particular pixel, that pixel, this one pixel over here on the crossing between two rectangles, is it actually still the crosswalk, or is it not, right? And so we end up with all of these experiences, and I really want to just figure out what would make a good design and what would make a bad design. Now, just before this entire madness this year started, I was lucky to be teaching in the University of the Netherlands in Amsterdam. And I was talking to students, just trying to understand how do they see the web. And it was not specifically focused on forms, but I just wanted to kind of get a feeling because, I'm 35 right now, and students were between 18 and 23, and there is a generation between us. And I was really kind of trying to understand how do they see the web. And I was very frustrated, by the frustrations that they had when experiencing the web. They don't even like the web the way I did when I was 22, 23, 24. And what do they don't like about the web? Well, they don't like small panes. Like, remember, whenever you have an e-commerce site and you have those filters for branding, and they might have like hundreds of options in there, you have a very, very tiny window where you have to scroll very carefully to get to the right one and hit the right checkbox. It's very frustrating, very annoying. The same goes for tiny click targets. Right? For example, a newsletter checkbox that you always find in the form, right? Whenever you want to opt out from being spammed, unexpected content shifts where things move around, images coming in, layout change, and things like that. Unexpected page reloads, which also happen very often in forms where you click submit, for example, to apply a coupon code, and all of a sudden the entire page gets kind of refreshed, right, or reloaded, and you just try to figure out what actually has happened, right? The country selector dropdown, and Netherlands is really, really, really not in a bad place, not in a good place here, because if you look in a regular country selector dropdown, where you might have all 292 countries, I think maybe 293 at this point. Well, where do you look for Netherlands? For Netherlands, is it going to be in the top, prioritized because it's one of the fancier countries? Or is it going to be not prioritized and be somewhere in the middle, starting with an N because it's Netherlands? Will it be the Netherlands? Will it be in Dutch? Or will it be in German? Or will it be in Cyrillic? Or will it be in any other language, right? This is always a story, and it's actually much faster to just type in. The other thing is generic error messages that don't really help at all, right? Which are just frustrating. If you tell somebody that there is an error just by having a red border around it, it doesn't really help because you don't know how to fix the error. Or input that's fully cleared on error, right? That's even worse. Buttons that are disabled, be it next button or be it back button, right? Because people move across, back and forth quite a bit. Disabled copy paste, nobody likes that. Sliders, imagine you need to change the slider, for example, for pricing, just a little bit, push one edge to the left or one edge to the right. And it's always so hard. And instead, it would be much more reasonable to have an input field, which we usually don't have. Plus, draconian password requirements. Some people do use password managers, some people do not. And if you do not use a password manager, especially for something like creating an account in an e-commerce site, you will be reusing the same password over and over again, unless the owner of the site will ask you to come up with a more complex password, which you will do by adding some characters that you don't have yet, these cryptic characters, to your baseline password, just appending them to the end, just to pass the gates. And then forgetting that password the moment you will be checking out, right? Anytime you have to retype complex input, which is forms, for example, for credit card input, because of PCI compliance, those things get cleared when you're moving from the review page to the address page and then back, right? That's my favorite one. Birthday picker that starts in 2020, right? Well, if you are typing in your birthday picker, your birthday, that's probably 2020 is probably not the right year to start. Well, what would it be? We'll talk about it in a moment. And then things like scroll jacking, parallax, and of course the captcha thing, identifying buses and crosswalks. Right? These are the things that people don't like, and it's not surprising. But really surprising, though, to me, is that all of those things, in some way or the other, are related to one single thing, and that would be forms, right? And so we have to get them right. And this is exactly what I kind of want to look into in a bit more detail today. So when we look into forms, I think one of the important things to understand first is how do people perceive forms, or specifically, how do people perceive input in web forms, right? Because when we look into it, it seems very obvious that you would ask for the first name, you would ask for the last name, and then just proceed this way. But let's just take a very, very close look at some of those decisions that we're making when we're designing those interfaces. One of them would be a date picker. Is it a good date picker? Is it a bad date picker? Right? Can you tell? It's probably very hard to say. Like, how can you tell? Many of us, I think, will say, no, this is not a good one. There's a lot of cognitive overload. It's just a lot of options. It's a lot of stuff repeated. Probably not very useful at all. Just checking here, everything's looking fine. Yes, everything's looking fine here. So, that's probably not a good one. Okay, so what about this one? Is this a good one? I'm just going to play it for a moment. This is the one where you have to type in the birth date, right? I can guess what is wrong here, right? And no, it's not like the previous one, right, where you have a select drop-down. You actually have an input field. The problem is it's not keyboard focusable, right? So you can't really just type in the numbers. Instead, you have to use, you actually have to use the widget in order to type it in. And then you have multiple levels, right? So for years and also for months. So probably an obvious way of measuring if it's good design or not would be the time. How much time, how many taps, how many clicks would be required to actually fill it in completely. And I guess that any kind of manual input for this complex input, right, would probably be faster than any select drop-down or any kind of widget like this. Or at least you need to support both, right, the keyboard input and the date picker as well. So when you start talking to people, you realize that very often the way people think about things is not necessarily mimicking what we create in interfaces. For example, when you ask somebody for their name, right, they never break down the name into parts, saying my first name is this, my middle name is that, and my last name is that. And sometimes people call me Joey, right? Well, people say, my name is this, and sometimes people call me Joey, right? There is no structure that's naturally involved in the way we speak. However, we actually mimic this structure mostly because of the databases that are happening, kind of sitting in the back in our front end, right? And that's kind of an issue because in many ways we're replicating a lot of legacy that's coming up from the way postal services work, for example, where they need a particular field for particular areas and for particular pieces of information, right? So we maybe need to revisit that. The same goes for address, right? This is why we have address line 1 and we have address line 2, right? Because we have this legacy systems, especially like if you think about UPS or the American US Postal Service, where they have very old legacy systems where they actually have to type in manually street, building number, apartment, unit, building, floor, PO box, and so on and so forth, right? And the same goes for many, many other things as well, right? So I was really trying to figure out like how can we then better map what people think with what we design. And that requires us, first of all, to break out of things that we used to see. So many of you it would probably take a while for many of you, definitely took a while for me to understand how this one works. Right? Now, this is the date picker, just not a regular one. Is it a good design? Is it a bad design? How can you tell? Well, it's a brilliant design, right? It's essentially a constructor of a date, but it would be horrible for something like an airline website or any examples that I showed previously. Why? Well, because you actually would use it on a dashboard or on a tablet where people, and it was designed for the New York Public Library, when people would index books. And they would index books much faster on a tablet where you have big buttons that you can tap easily, right? Definitely way more effective than LS select drop-down, right, in that particular case. And definitely way more, useful than I would say any kind of date picker that we're used to, right? So when I think about an effectiveness of something, I think about speed. And that means we need to think about how fast do people type, both on mobile and on tablet and on desktop. Now, so there's a lot of data in here, but there are just a few key things that I want you to take away from this. First of all, there is a difference of the speed with which we're typing, and it differs depending on what we are typing. So if you have to decipher a CAPTCHA, right, this is going to take you more time just because you really have to read every single character and try to get what it is, right? On the other hand, when it comes to an English word that you know, like learn or so, you'd be really, really fast in typing it. It's almost like a muscle memory. So on average, I did forget to add a source here, but I will. On average, you will have users typing in 1 character in English of an English word, if they are familiar with an English language, of course, in around 300 milliseconds. But if it's an obscure text that they don't know or a language they don't speak properly, it will take 750 milliseconds. Think about, having to type in something in a language you don't know, like maybe Swedish or so. It will take you a while to actually type it because you just don't know the language. Now, on the other hand, what's really quite important as well is that you will need a bit of time to switch between the keyboard and the mouse. And that might not sound like a big deal, so sure, like, yeah, you will be needing some time to switch between keyboard and mouse. But the more we enforce or require people to switch to mouse or to keyboard or back and forth, the slower the typing will be, right? Because it's always going to start slowly yet again. And then whenever you switch to, from keyboard to mouse, you will have to switch back as well. So you'll be losing almost a second on that. Seems like, sure, like makes sense. Well, we need to ask ourselves, do we require our customers, important sign-up form to switch from keyboard to mouse a lot, right? Because when do people switch between the keyboard and mouse? Well, first of all, when they cannot use tab order properly. So if you don't have a proper tab order in your form, then people will have to fix it by using the mouse quite a bit and navigating through the form by using the mouse, right? And now, on the other hand, whenever you have any kind of interactive elements or something that's just far away from each other, like maybe a continue button that's all the way in the right upper corner as a floating button, right? Or maybe it's something like a select drop-down or anything that people are more likely to interact with the mouse, right? Then, well, you will have this switch quite a bit, right? So we have to consider this as well, which all means altogether, if you think about an 8 fields address form, right? With all the things that I showed previously, like the PO box, the address line 2 stuff, and so on. If you have appropriate order for tabbing and you let people stay on the keys, be it on mobile or on desktop, people will in general tab or fill in a form 3 times faster. And that's quite important. Now, also is important that if you do support autofill, autocomplete that browsers have, right, the completion time will be reduced by at least 30%. This is one of the statistics that came out from Google, I think, a year ago or so. It might be even better now because autocomplete got better as well, right? And that means that when I start thinking about, the speed, I think about 2 particular metrics, which I call the input budgets for forms. Because we know a few things. We know that typing on mobile is still very slow and still very inaccurate, right? We know that. We also know that changing input source, changing the keyboard, for example, on mobile is going to be quite expensive and take a bit of time. We also know that input flow is never linear. People tend to review things, they make mistakes, they go back, they have error messages and things like that. And we also know that touch input is always faster or better than text input, unless it's a lot of scrolling or a lot of clicking required. And that means that we can look into these very simple metrics, which are number 6 and 7 here. Let's measure how much time a person needs to fill in a form successfully. And that means if you take into account that somebody is typing correct input only, but they don't make any mistakes, no errors show up at all, what is the minimum number of taps that is required to fill in that form? Or what is the minimum number of clicks that is required to fill in the form? Or what is the minimum number of keystrokes that is required to fill in the form, right? Ideally, if you have your input and you have a proper tab order, that number will probably match very closely, right, the actual length of each string that you're supposed to type in, right? In that case, that's pretty reasonable. That's pretty good. But if it's not the case and you have to move around quite a bit, then it's probably bad. Now, on the other hand, there is also this notion of perceived complexity that we usually have, right? Which is how many input fields do we show at a given time, right? At most, do we show like 20? Do we show at most 5? Because the smaller the steps are, and of course they need to be logically grouped, but the smaller the steps are, the more likely people are to go through them faster. Now, with this in mind, it's also important to consider that there is always a very different but a very important question, right? And don't forget, I don't even talk about layout and things like that. But specifically, if you think about the form, we need to figure out what is the right timing to ask for anything. I'm always getting so confused and a little bit frustrated by all the e-commerce sites, for example, that show up a newsletter pop-up or a push notification prompt or any kind of notification or, I don't know, geolocation requests just when you enter the site. I mean, it's really clear why it's done, right? Because there is a new customer coming in, you don't have any data, you want to have some data in order to be validating input or showing them the right shipping costs in their currency for their country and so on. But we need to think really about what is the right timing, because when you think about something as simple as a newsletter box, right, which would show up on a as a pop-up when you enter the site, it kind of will help, of course, to get some emails for the first-time customers if you offer some sort of like $10 discount or so. But as a business, I just don't really want random emails. I want good emails. I want good emails that people check. I want the good email in kind of list, which has very low bounce rate, which have very high opening rates, right? So I care about the correctness of the email. I don't want to just get more emails to pay more money for MailChimp and other services, right? Or Campaign Monitor. I want to get just, good emails. And that means we need to think about when is the right time to show that newsletter box so the customer is actually invested and interested in typing in the correct email address. Because people are not stupid, right? They found a way to trick the system. So if you show the newsletter box which says, please sign up and you get a $10 discount, people know that there are fake email generators and they will use it, especially the younger generation will, right? So by the end of that, you will have a lot of people who will get the discount or maybe multiple ones, right? And you will end up with a lot of really bad email addresses that you can't even use because people who, sending them to don't even exist anymore because all those are fake email addresses. So we need to ask when is the right time to ask for an email, when is the right time to verify the correctness of the email, when is the right time to ask for password, location permission, push notifications, and to move people into the funnel. When do they need to get enough information? For example, right now I'm working for an insurance company. And with an insurance company, there was a question of when do we drive people to the funnel? What does it mean? Well, there is a configurator where you can choose your own insurance, right? You can choose insurance for your car or for your house and so on. And so there was an idea, let's put those big buttons in the center of the homepage and let's just drive people to configurator so they can actually do that right away. And then there was a conversation, maybe we should do something else instead. Maybe we should drive them to the category first of their choice. If they want to find a car configurator or configurator for their car insurance, right? Maybe let's move them to the car insurance page first, where they can learn about some of the things that they need to know, about some of the extra features that we have and so on, and only then drive people to the funnel. And that was performing much better, right, than just putting it on the top, because it would cause an incredible bounce rate. And then also, what is the absolute minimum needed to get started, right? So all these things kind of have to be considered. Now let's take it and kind of bring it together into an action. That requires a bit of conversation about input types, because we have different ones, right? And we need to ask ourselves, how do we pick the right ones? So one thing is probably obvious. On the one hand, we have something that's probably the most simple thing of them all, which is an input field. And an input field should be an input field, which means it should be looking like a text box. It's very common to see people struggling with not figuring out even an input field is actually an input field, because very often they don't have borders and very often they don't have padding, and very often it's really, really hard to read, or decipher or distinguish between them and the background. And so they should look like a text box, and their width gives a clue as to the length of the input it requires. And they also, of course, need a clear label association for accessibility, proper tab order, focus, active styles, and of course, at this point as well, we need to think about the keyboard choice, especially on mobile, autofocus, autofill, autocorrect, capitalization, right? All those things that we probably know for good anyway. But this brings us to one of the patterns that's been very, very famous, and that's become very, very famous with material design, which is, it used to be called the floating label pattern, right? Sometimes these labels will be appearing at the bottom. There is a problem with them. It's not just that they're horrible, so we should never use them, but we need to make sure that they are kind of well understood. And that perfectly, first of all, requires us to think about what is needed to happen for the placeholders, to work here. So when floating labels act as placeholders, they're becoming difficult because they don't leave space for any extra hints. If you have an error message, you'll have to be kind of showing up separately at the bottom. If you need to translate them at some point to another language, it's going to be difficult. They might be cropped on mobile if there is not enough screen. They can be mistaken for a real pre-filled value as well. They might be difficult to read. And so many, many things that need to be considered. We do have one-on smashing. It was a bit of a hassle to make it work. So probably I wouldn't really want to do it again, right? And so the other thing as well is that some screen readers don't announce them, and long hint text might get cut off. So we'll talk about what would be a better way of doing this, but you need to be very, very cautious and get a lot of stuff done to avoid these issues that are showing up with floating labels. Now, on the other hand, we do need to have this conversation, the required or optional or both. Now, there are different studies saying different things, because we could do 4 different things, right? We could, if we have a form, and in the form we have required and optional fields, and usually optionals should not be needed, but they will be needed or required, based on some preferences that business has and marketing has, and so on and so forth. So sometimes you have both. So the question is, do we highlight only required? Do we highlight only optional? Do we highlight only none, right? None of them? Or do we highlight required and optional, both of them? And so there are different studies on that. And ideally, and this is a very good point, I think, we usually in an interface mark something to indicate that it's different, because most of the fields will be required. We probably don't need to highlight them as required. Instead, we can only highlight optional, and that's probably what I would do. But there are also studies like the one coming from Baymard Institute when they tested a lot of e-commerce sites. It's actually better and safer to highlight both optional and required. Also because there are more optional coming up in e-commerce sites than they do in a regular form, like let's say donation form or so, right? And another thing, of course, is that radio buttons need to be round. And I love this example from Gov.uk. Like there's an animation and there's a very clear association with labels and just beautiful, accessible forms, right? And radio buttons are round, right? I probably don't need to say that here, but it is important that they make options easy to compare and scan and select. You can think about things like an airplane, fare comparison, right? Where you have maybe a matrix where you have the times and you have the price in the departure date and the arrival date, and you have the price in between, right? And all of them will be radio buttons, right? But they don't have to be only radio buttons. They can also be just big buttons. So this is also a selection, right? In here on Blue Apron, where we have this big box in the middle, right? Vegetarian, signature. They are radio buttons because they're mutually exclusive, so they don't have to look round. But if you make them, in a traditional form, look like a radio button, then they probably should be circular and not rectangular. And sometimes it would be kind of both. So here on the Starlight, you have both a radio button and also the button per se, which also works fairly fine here as well, right? And these are radio buttons, of course, as well, right? But then when we look further, we'll see that this is happening sometimes. And this is, it's not a crime against interface design, of course, but at this point, it's just not very helpful, because if you make a checkbox look like a radio button, just confusing maybe at times. It's really not necessary. On the other hand, if you do have a checkbox, they probably should be squared, right? Again, this is not very surprising, I guess, but this should probably be the case, because this is what people are used to. And in fact, you don't really have to act on only a selection of one. You can also distinguish between groups of checkboxes and then mark them separately, right? Which of course brings us to the one and only select dropdown. And when we look into select dropdown like this, right, I really again argue with the timing argument, right? How much time would I need to fill it in? So if I look at Open Table, and on Open Table I have the calendar widget, right, which is fine, right? It's fine. I still think that it could be reasonable to have an input field. But then I have the select dropdowns, one for the time and one for the number of people. And again, at this point, I'm wondering, is there a better way, a faster way to type it in, right? Is there more reasonable to maybe have a switch between PM and AM instead of repeating them all over? Is it better to maybe have 2 input fields and maybe a little jumper with the arrows to the right, like chevron pointing to the right and to the left, to jump by 1 hour or by 15 minutes or so, right? And then when we look into the number of people, maybe like, this minus and plus buttons on both edges would be better. It's fine that the default is 2, but do we need like 16 people in that select dropdown, right? And the problem with the select dropdowns is that they're just really slow. They're slower than everything else. So if you can avoid them, it's probably a good idea to do so. And this could be done with many different options. Like, for example, whenever you have something that contains only 2 options, like show or hide, you might want to use a toggle for it, right? Whenever we have some sort of minimum, maximum range, Well, maybe a slider with an option to type in the value right there with an input field, right? Or whenever you have something like the number of bats or bass, right? Segmented control might be a good idea, again, to just have buttons representing that. And the same goes for a series of buttons, like many, many, many buttons, right? Button inputs are great, and they can be quite fast, right? Especially if you have very complex drop-down as an alternative. And in fact, if you look around, you will find that, sometimes when it comes to filters, you will find quite a few interfaces using those button interfaces, right? I think it just has become a thing, mostly because they're much faster to interact with compared to a select dropdown, right? So in general, preferring steppers or buttons like that would usually help more than not help, right? Now, finally, once we have this in place, and I probably need like another 10, 15 minutes, Martin, please kick me off if you need to wrap up. Hopefully it doesn't have to kick me off. We'll see about that.
I'll let it slide.
Excellent.
Because it's crisp.
Oh, you're being so kind today to me. Now, once we know how people think, and once we know about all these little elements, right, that we have at our disposal, we need to bring it all together. And I want to share with you the strategy that I follow when we do that. And this is kind of related to the notion of input boundaries, which we have to define for our forms. So if we look into a slightly more complex form, like let's say this one, which is a B2B form for a business plan checkout. It has a couple of things. It has a number of users in here on the top, a payment method, payment term, annually, quarterly, monthly, company, full name, email, phone, country, and other things, and disabled submit button. Now, well, what issues could come up in a checkout? Again, when we go back to what I mentioned in the beginning, haven't we solved it yet? I mean, seriously, it's been like 25 years in the e-commerce world. We should have done it by now. Well, the problem is we didn't. Right? The problem is when we look into checkout, there are so many things that can go wrong and probably will go wrong. Not only complex input like a credit card input, but also things where the input is just required and it's very, very strict and it's really, really difficult to type it in. Layout is confusing, maybe multi-column layout or so. Account that needed to be created to actually fill in the form. Poor performance in terms of feedback from the server. Poor support for autofill. Poor validation. Poor error messages. Poor data editing if you need to change it, slow typing, data loss on errors or refresh, aggressive validators. You might have been in this situation before when you type in your address and you're pretty certain that your address is correct, but the validator is too aggressive and it tells you that it's not, right? Do we help, like, kind of let people proceed, or do we stop them and just abandon them, right? This is, again, the conversation we need to have. And then disappearing labels, poor IP geo-targeting, especially if we're using VPN, poor support of back button, and lack of auto-formatting, auto-updating, localization, and focus styles. So this is like all these examples are coming from this really great article by, I forgot the author's name, DKO. He kind of looked into a lot of detail. And that really inspired me because I thought, yes, this is probably the way of how we could do this. So if we look into a form like this and we just look at it in a lot of detail, what we tend to do is so-called form profiling. And that means let's take a very close look at every single input field that we've got. And that means we're going to have designers and developers who are responsible sit together and just talk with those things using a checklist that I created. And I love my checklists. And I mean, I'm happy for you to have them as well. And so, for example, when you look into company name, okay, so what do we have here? That would be kind of the way the conversation would go. Okay, it's a required field, so we don't have to fill it, kind of mark it in any way. We want to pre-fill it if applicable. We probably don't want to pre-fill passwords or something like that, right? But we want to pre-fill this. What kind of characters do we support? Do we support Chinese characters? Do we support Cyrillic characters? Do we support entire UTF-8 or 16 or whatever? Yes, we probably do. Any characters are allowed, right? And then maybe we want to do something like adaptive placeholders, which you can do where based on the IP that the user has, you might change the placeholders state, right? It might be an example. It might be something in a local language, which is always dangerous. So we can talk about this as well. And then we need to talk about the minimum length and the maximum length, probably because of the database, right? That sounds reasonable. We can do this. And then we move on to the next one. And that one would be full name. And then here, the same thing, mandatory pre-fill if applicable. We accept alphabetic and space and hyphen and dot. It could be somebody like Mr. or Junior or things like that. Minimum length, hard to say. It's very easy to have somebody who is called all, right? So it could be 2 characters, maybe not 3. Maximum length, do we need to set it? maybe 70, maybe 150, right? It's just a conversation we need to have. And all of these are not guidelines, right? They're just conversation starters to have with designer and developer think about what is the form going to look like. And then comes the more important or the more difficult part, which, for example, is an email. In an email, you have validation now in place. And you need to think about what the validation is and how do you validate and when do you validate. Is it the inline validation? Do you validate after the field, after the user has left the field, right? Or as they're typing, right? Again, all these conversations need to be had. And then finally, also things like phone number, right? Where you have auto formatting and you have minimum language depends on the country and maximum language depends on the country. And you definitely want to have an accessible tooltip or hint where the screener is going to announce whatever the hint is saying. So this thing going to be mentioned as well. Kind of get where we're heading, right? We go just one field at a time, step by step, and we just do profiling on each of them. And then, and this is where I want to kind of just show a little bit more before I kind of close. Here we have the country selector, right? And we know that this is probably not the best way of designing it. So that doesn't mean that an autocomplete would always be better, right? We need to think about what the autocomplete experience is going to be like. So when somebody has started typing United, right, we probably want to highlight at the top things that are more likely to be correct or be useful to the customer, right? So should it be alphabetical order? Maybe not. Maybe we should assign weights to every single item in the list based on our user base, right? And then prioritize the ones where most customers are coming from. But maybe instead of doing just that, right, when somebody has focused on the input field, maybe we want to show them something, right, like a group of frequently used countries and then the alphabetical list of all countries. And of course, the frequently used ones should reappear again in alphabetical list as well, just because some people might be too fast and they might scroll down before realizing that their country, in this case Netherlands, is on the top, right? So we need to have both. And when somebody starts typing, we probably need to readjust that depending on what they are typing, right? Plus, also very important, we do want to make sure that window over here that covers the text or the form is kind of cut off, so it indicates that it's not complete. Because imagine if you had, let's say, exactly 7 or so frequently used countries that could show up in the list, right? They would be showing up there, but then some people just don't see the scroll bar because it doesn't exist on some of the interfaces, on some of the operating systems, so they will not scroll down and not ever finding that there is an alphabetical list. Now, they might start typing, of course, and we hope that they will do, but you really just want to avoid that. And so that means when it comes to things like that, we need to figure out required, want to prefill if applicable, want to have autocomplete and autocorrect. If somebody is typing in United States but misses an A, right, we probably should correct that instead of saying this country doesn't exist, right? The same thing, we need to support abbreviations like USA or GB, right? DE, NL, CH, and so on. Frequently used countries, alphabetical list of countries, and a fixed height of, let's say, 7.5 cells, right? It can change depending on the viewport that you have. But then we can also think about, detection by IP. Do we want to detect by IP and fill it in automatically? If we do that, what's the experience going to be when somebody wants to cancel or edit it when they have a VPN, right? So will we have a cancel link or delete link or clear link somewhere, or will they have to type in to remove all the characters from United States of America backwards? That would be frustrating. Having a cancel link would be much faster, right? So we need to think about these scenarios as well. And then show drop-down on focus, subset abbreviations, validation needed. And then upon selection, we could move to zip code as well. And the most important thing, which is why I think this country selector is the gold mine, really. And I mean, I get why we often ask for the email first, most of the time just because we want to send remarketing emails later. But actually asking for the country early is really, really beneficial, because then based on that, you can change the currency and you can change the shipping costs and you can change all the prices in the shop to the final prices, right? And so because once you know the country, you can change so many things in your form. And this is just an incomplete list of all of them that I could discover. And that's the currency, wording on labels, spelling on buttons, formatting on dates and times, adjusting input masks and text hints, and the wording a zip code or postal code, city country or city state, placeholders, masking, input fields width. I'm very proud of this one. VAT calculation and taxes, and of course also legal requirements. Now you might wonder, legal requirements? Well, you will have to change the behavior of your newsletter checkbox, well, be it opted in or opted out by default, right? Because in some countries, like if you look into Canada, for example, or California or European Union, you will not be allowed to actually mark that newsletter box by default. It would need to be unchecked. But in the other countries, it might be checked. So that's something that would probably have an impact on the behavior as well. Now, with all of that, we probably just need to figure out a few more questions, and then I'm going to wrap up. And the one thing is, when we look into, patterns that are appearing, what is good and what is not so good? Like one of the common ones that has been appearing actually is this way of typing in the values or the country, right, based on the pre-fill. And the way it works is like, for example, on grace.com, where you're typing your email address and you're typing other things and so on and so forth, right? And eventually you're going to the postal address or your shipping address or delivery address, right? Okay, this is all quite standard here. And so as we continue, what we see here is start typing your street address. I think you might have seen this in the past as well. And the question is it a good pattern or is it a bad pattern? Is it helping or is it hurting? And luckily, there is an option to, if you can't find your address, to enter it manually. Now, it's kind of weird because it really heavily depends on the country. Now, you might have seen this in the past, right? When you start typing in your characters, right, of your street, and then eventually you hit a couple of, you tap the pre-selector a couple of times, and then essentially you got your address. Now, that can be very problematic for one reason, and for the reason that actually, when you have this thing, you cannot use autofill at all, right? It's just not going to be recognized. And in fact, if your country, and this is actually quite common in Europe, right? If you start typing your address, you will start with the street address first, which means that you will have to type in the entire street first, street name, and then you will have to type in the number. But if you type in the number first, which is also very common in some other countries, you will actually get the results faster. So normally, you need to know the audience. So if people are likely to type in the street address, it's not really helpful at all. It would be probably way faster with autofill. But if they type in the digit first, right, the house number, then it's probably going to be better, right? On the other hand, the question that often comes up is, do we have a one-column layout or two-column layout for our form, right? And the answer is actually quite simple. Well, if you have two columns, you will always have people missing something, right? Some parts. It could be the left column part or the right column part. It could not be easier ever to just create something very, very simple and very straightforward. Now I have to show it over here like this, right? It's just always right. You cannot go do anything wrong with it. In my entire history and the entire time this year when I was doing the usability test, there is never a single issue with the label appearing above the input field with the tooltip or any kind of hint appearing under it, between the label and the input field. This works all the time, like all the time. If you have only one column and it's designed this way, you will minimize the time people need to actually get anywhere, right? And you will also help them avoid mistakes down the line. The only thing, and this is where I'm wrapping up, Martin, the only thing that we need to keep in mind here is that we need to really think about inline validation at this point, because there are three kinds, and all of them are pretty bad. The first one is premature validation, when you just focus on the input field and all of a sudden the interface tells you that you're wrong because you're wrong because you haven't typed in anything yet, but apparently you are wrong already. Well, that's not very helpful. Now we also have immediate validation, which happens as user types, right? And then we also have late validation, which happens when the user has left the field. And fortunately, the late validation has become a standard, although you still find some immediate validation every now and again. But the problem is that they all interrupt users either too early or too late. So there is a way of kind of making it a bit better, and that's the idea behind reward early and punish late. And the idea is quite simple. So for every input, we set a minimum threshold of characters that needs to be passed for the validation to kick in. So we start validating only if that threshold is reached. If there is an error, like for example, somebody typed in the email address with 2 @ we show it immediately without waiting for people leaving the field. So if there is an error for sure, we inform the customer that there is an error, right? And we show success only if the user has moved to the next field, right? So once they left the field where they were, and they move to the next one because the input for that field seemed to be finished. Now, what happens now is when somebody decides to edit a field that was valid, right? It was valid, it was green. Well, we remove the green check the moment they hit the input, right? Again, and they start typing, and we validate when they actually leave it, right? So if there was a mistake, we punish late. Now, if they edit a field that was invalid, right? The moment they hit that input field, we're still showing red, right? But then if they fixed it, right, and they're still in the input field, we show the check mark right away. So we kind of reward early, but then punish late. It's not really groundbreaking, but it kind of helps, right? But this requires a lot of logic. You need to actually make it work for every single input field, right? This is not easy at all, right? Or the alternative would be just to have late validation. And finally, the one thing that we shouldn't avoid or we shouldn't neglect, I guess, is the errors, right? Because the question is, where should errors appear, for example? Should they appear above the input or below the input? Now, they probably need a red border anyway, and it's probably more reasonable to have them above the input field just because both on mobile and on desktop, whenever you're typing, you will see that error. If you happen to be on mobile, this part might be, the error message might be cut off. Right, and there are also other things you can do. For example, if you have a complex form which requires a lot of steps or so, you might want to change the title every now and again if there is an error, because somebody might have left to another tab already and they don't even remember about that form, so you want to notify them about that, right? Or when somebody hits submit button and there are mistakes, instead of making the button disabled, because it doesn't really communicate what is a problem, we probably want to keep it enabled at all times. And when somebody hits on submit, we can show a little pop-up saying, hey, you need to fix one error, and link directly to that error. Or if there is only one, you can actually say what the error is. Now, that notification could show up above submit button, again, for the same reason that we talked about previously, so nobody will ever miss it, right? And again, just want to really be very specific about this. Whenever we have a disabled submit button, the problem with them is they don't really explain what is wrong. And sometimes users are left wondering what's missing. They're not focusable and hard to read as they're grayed out. With enabled buttons, we can better highlight all the errors. And if you can't do that for some reason, right, and you have to keep disabled buttons, one thing that we tested and it worked like magic, right, is to pick up those people who might be left and who might be not able to proceed by having maybe some sort of a link at the bottom between, under the register button or under the continue button, saying something like, help, I cannot proceed. And when they click on that link, help, I cannot proceed, right? You could just collect all the data that they have submitted already, or they have typed in already, and send it out to the customer support. The customer support has at least a chance to get back to them without just losing that customer for sure. Because if a customer cannot proceed for some reason, maybe because the validator is too strong for the address or so, right, they will be just left out and you will lose their business, right, which you probably don't want to have. Now, all of this just to say, there are many things that we can do with forms, right? And many ways we know what works and what doesn't. And when we look into what people like in 2020, right, this is all quite straightforward. People like fast and accessible experiences. They like large and legible text, large checkboxes and radio buttons, input boxes that look like input boxes, forms that support focus on active states, simple password requirements, predictable tabbing, helpful error messages, good autocomplete, user input that's persistent on refresh. So whenever you hit refresh accidentally or you lose the browser tab, this data still is there, right? Drop down that's opening on tap or click instead of just hover, probably just both, really. Easy undos, edits cancellation, predictable back button, smoothing notification. That's another thing when you have maybe that somebody is going to get a birthday tomorrow and you expect them to get a lot of messages from all the friends or whatever. You could just send them a message saying, hey, we can snooze your notification next time you send them a notification so they don't get bombarded with all those notifications for a couple of days at least. Pausing subscriptions, right? It is very common for people that they don't want to cancel, but they just want to pause for a while. So if you have a Financial Times account or so, you just don't want to feel like paying right now. You don't need it, but you don't want to lose all your bookmarks and all. So let people just keep it there and pause the subscription for a while. And also transparent pricing. And these are the things that show up a lot, right? And so if we can mimic and create forms that would actually move more towards this and a little bit less towards the ones that I showed previously, we'll be in a much better space. And maybe we'll make forms fun, like this one, because we can make even the radio button fun. I don't know about you, but I love this one. And why not make people click twice or 3 times or 4 times to actually subscribe to our email newsletter? Maybe that would then we would have a chance to create a really strong emotional connection with them. And they will probably not forget the moment when they actually signed up with that particular service, right? I have way more examples than that, but we probably will leave it at that, I guess. So with this in mind, just to wrap up, right? I hope that all these things, all these little examples will help you a little bit to get a better understanding why forms are really difficult, why they're annoying and frustrating, and what we can do as designers and as developers to make forms just a little bit better. I also have a summary, which I'm going to leave here if you want to take a screenshot or so, right, for a while. And with this in mind, just a huge no and thank you for being smashing and being kindful and supportive, and for sticking with all of us throughout this year. And I really hope that I will see all of you next year, the same day in Zurich. And thank you so much, Martin and Alexei, for having me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for the fantastic presentation. Alexei has just mentioned that you have now the record of the longest Webzurich presentation. But as I said, it's kind of Christmas, so I'll happily let it slide. And if you want to show the other lovely, delightful animation examples, then I mean, why not? While we are here, do you want to?
Yeah, just 2 maybe or 3, and that's it.
Please.
I think some of you might have seen them before, but for example, if I look at this one, this is one of the better pop-ups I've seen in my life. Actually, I've shown them a couple of times now, but this is just so incredible, and I love how annoying and frustrating it is. But as long as it fits within the story, even a pop-up can be delightful. I think, don't you love?
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, this one, very often you end up with this, like when you're being asked for the date of birth, and luckily at least with the input fields, but then, you can type in 32nd of 43rd month on 1547, and you will still enter the site because they don't really care, right? And you can actually make it more fun, like this, for example, like Austin Beerworks do it. And it doesn't require a lot of effort. So you type in like 21 or not, right? And then it just becomes your choose your own adventure kind of thing. And the interface just, keeps talking to you, and then you just reply to it, and eventually you just don't want to click yes anymore, right?
This is amazing.
Yeah, I wish I could see more websites like this out there.
Oh God. Oh, this is amazing. Sorry, no again. Oh my God. Okay, this is fantastic. This is a beautiful design. I think
the best part, it's really easy to do. You just need a bit of copywriting there, right?
Yeah. That's a lovely example.
Yeah, and this is the final one I want to leave you with, because when we're looking into things like checkouts, and we have the title, and this title is very often Mr., Miss, Mrs., and we know why it's being asked and all. But then sometimes you see companies like bodenusa.com, they go a little bit extra mile, I would say. So wouldn't you want to get a package delivered to you as Princess Martin Split?
Yes, definitely. Squadron leader. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And there are so many options in there. It's very cool.
My goodness, that's a lot. Wow.
Yeah,
really nice. I like that.
Exactly. So with this, just hope that all those little things, and I'd be happy to share the slides here as well. And you can go to get the checklist on smash.by/checklists, where you will find everything that I've learned about forms this year. It was a long year, so a lot of stuff about forms that had to be learned.
It was a long year, but also an amazing meetup, I think. I would like to thank our 3 wonderful speakers of today, and also actually all of our speakers for the year, who have taken the time out of their busy and probably somewhat turbulent 2021 activities to actually present in our meetup. And I do hope that next year, same time, we'll have you in Zurich again, and we actually get to chit chat and have fun like we used to. But until then, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again for being here. And will you be in the live chat thing afterwards?
Yes.
Ah, that's awesome. All right. In that case, see you there in a moment. I'll give you all the link in a second, and again show you our last bits of administrative bits and pieces. Again, this is the last meetup for this year, and we hope for a better year next year. The next opportunity to join us again, very likely to be virtual as well, is going to be the 29th of January. And now I will ask a few questions in the after party chat. And these questions will give you an opportunity to get a free ticket to a bunch of conferences. I can't remember which all are covered by the ticket, but we'll have a conversation about that in just a moment at webzh.dev/afterparty. So I would love to see you there, or to see you on the 29th of January for the January meetup. Thanks a lot for joining us tonight, and have a fantastic time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay amazing, and keep building cool stuff on the web. Bye-bye.